Good morning, team. We are coming to you live. It's 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. on the East Coast, which is where I am. This is where the East Coast is now. We live in beautiful, sunny weather times. This is an experiment. Obviously, we're going to see how this goes. We hope we can get your questions answered. The board has been awesome. They've already provided us with some questions that we're absolutely going to get to. But before we get to those questions, there's two things we really need to talk about. The first is our new DB that we've got and what that means for an elite IQ heavy secondary. And then we're going to talk about the transfer portal. Are we done or are we still in play? I've got the usual suspects here. We've got Eric Nahlin, Paul Wadlington, and Ian Boyd. Eric, let's start with you. Obviously, we had a great session yesterday with Coach and Joe, and I invite you all to check that out. We're breaking down our new defensive back. But I'd love to get your and Ian's opinion on this, certainly, because this is one of those acquisitions that we've had that's I've seen you guys probably the most excited about, at least in this cycle, with the level of intelligence that this is going to bring to our secondary. And I'd love for you to expand on that if you can.
Well, they replaced, Brooks with Cole, and to me, that's going to limit some assignment busts that we've seen in the past, and that's the name of the game in the secondary. Just don't give up any big plays, make them earn it. Sark was talking about the other day. It's hard to have these 8-10 play drives. It's hard on offense. That's what he's pointing out. You want the defense to force that. I think Terrence Brooks, with all the talent he had, gave up too many big plays. People said that 80% of the time he was amazing, but that other 20%, you've got to. It's tough to work around. And then on top of it, Cole is just assignment sound. He's a good athlete, and he's very smart. He's going to be a good zone defender, which is always a concern. It's a lot harder to play zone than it is to play man. I think he comes in with a very good head start on what they're going to run this season.
Ian, this was schematically something you were pretty excited about. What's Cole bringing here that is going to change the makeup of the abilities of our defense?
Well, he's very skilled at executing match coverages. So his profile is pretty interesting because he ran like a 10.6 100 meter as a high school senior in Oakland, which is great. So you would have thought he would have had a better recruiting options than going to. I think he went to Cal Poly and then transferred to San Jose State last year. Now he's finally getting out of the Bay. So you would think that a guy like that would just be like a press man coverage specialist who's dominating lower level athletes. But that's not the case at all. You watch him, he's playing a lot of cover three. He's reading what's in front of him. He's staying in position over the top. He matches the right routes. He can break on the ball because he's fast, but he's not just manning a guy up. And then at times when they did ask him to go play straight man coverage on a guy, he could do that too. So he's kind of they kind of struck gold here. They found a really talented guy, and they were smart to lock him up quickly before it became like a national recruiting war for him.
One of the things that I think would be helpful is if you could just give us a brief explanation about the different skill sets required for either being boundary or field and where you see him playing more frequently. We'll stick with you here, Ian.
Probably the field. When you're in the boundary, you're closer to the action. So you're more likely to blitz off the edge. You're more likely to mix in some like cover two assignments where you are playing the run on the perimeter. And you also have to muscle up the receiver some. You can't play off as much and rely on breaking the ball because the ball's going to get there too fast. The quarterback is in much closer proximity. He's not a big guy. He's like 180, I think, 5'10". To the field side, you're playing in a lot more space. And so your ability to see things develop and then break on the ball is the bigger question. And that's where he excels. So I would expect to see him more in space than uptight in the boundary.
Paul, with this addition, one of the questions that was asked on the board at InsideTexas.com, which we obviously invite you to subscribe to and check out, was the idea that one, Texas may need an elite secondary in order to win the national championship. And more importantly, the predecessor to that is, what does Texas need to do with its current stock of players to get to an elite level? Is that something that's even possible this year?
At the secondary level, could they be elite? I'm not sure. I'm not sure they could be elite. They could be very, very good. Partly because I hold elite as rarefied air. I don't think being top 10 makes you elite. I think top 3 makes you elite. So I only see one elite secondary or maybe 2 coming into the season. And then we'll see if Texas can join that fold. I think there's 2 things about him that are interesting, or actually 3. One, I actually kind of know that area from having lived in the Bay Area before. And Oakland, the high school that he went to, I think is McClemens, is an off-the-radar high school. It's not even one of the powerhouses in Oakland that even people know about. And Oakland in and of itself is a little off the radar just because you can get some interesting stories there, and college recruiters sometimes feel like they're wasting their time. So I think he's just a guy who flew completely under the radar. And, I think that obviously there's a huge beneficiary. He's also emblematic of the fact that, I was saying, I think I wrote a piece saying that FCS football, as recently as in this decade, the FCS, Cal Poly level football, put out 20 NFL draft picks one year. That's never going to happen again. I just don't think it's going to happen ever again. And he showed the portal in action. Year 1, FCS school, Cal Poly. Year 2, G5. Year basically 4, I guess, Texas. If you're really good, you're going to get identified. You're going to keep leveling up. And the track record on those guys performing well at the next level is good. When a player keeps leveling up, there's something going on there physically with the player, or you just missed him entirely coming out of high school, and he just keeps getting better in a way that the failed 5-star for 4 years at Alabama probably not going to have that 5th year where he breaks out. So that's.
Can you clarify a little bit for me, Paul? Because are you talking about not having an FCS player finish? Let me rephrase that. They're not finishing their career at an FCS level and then going to the NFL. You see the constant progression. So they may start there, but they're not going to finish there. And I think that's an important distinction, because this is also just changing the way that players, can enter this atmosphere of Power 5 football. And I think this kid is a really good example of resiliency and fortitude and betting on yourself, right?
Yep.
Just throwing yourself out there, being like, look, I understand that I'm not going to one of these top schools straight out of high school, but that in no way is going to mean that this is where I'm going to end up, right? He's really, really pushed for that. And I think, to me, and this is, I think, is what you're talking about, this is indicative of the shift in not only recruiting from a high school level, but how players view themselves in the developmental process of football. You're going to have the Jason Kelce's of the world that, start out as linebackers, maybe not get any offers, go to Cincinnati, and now they end up as all-pro centers. So that obviously this is not the direct path, but I think what we're showing kids now is that there's a lot more opportunity than there was in the past. What are your thoughts, Eric, on this concept of an elite secondary and whether we can get there and what we might need to be doing?
Well, first, the same phenomena Paul's talking about happens with coaches all the time. Look at Willie Fritz's career trajectory. Look at Brian Kelly. These guys that started nowhere schools. Lance Leipold, they started nowhere schools and they win at each stop. It's a pretty safe bet that they're going to win the next one. They've got some things clearly figured out. And I think he's a smart corner. We know that's going to translate. It's more of the Silicon Valley to Austin brain drain that Austin is benefiting a little bit more of. I think that I'm going to judge the secondary by how sound it plays behind the defense front seven. There's going to be a lot of they're going to have to be replacement tacklers in a lot of instances to make up for the loss in the defensive tackle. So I'm looking to see how well they play together, how cohesively. I don't think they're going to be elite by NFL draft measures. You're not going to see the 2005 NFL draft, 2006 NFL draft that you saw with Texas. But I think they're going to be very good playing behind the linebackers and in the front. That's what I was most worried about. The playing cohesively through all 3 units is my greatest concern going into next season. Adding another intelligent piece, I think, helps that a lot. And you like that he has some ball production. He's got ball production. Manny Muhammad's got it for the little bit that he's played. Michael Taft had it. Makuba had it when he was at free safety. Didn't have it as much as a nickel. Janae Barron has it as a nickel. So it's just a very smart, cohesive unit. At least it should be on paper. And then you've got some stud talent like Derek Williams that you're going to bring along. He's got a chance to start still, of course. And you got some younger corners to work in, Warren Roberson. But And I think that guy can play in the boundary. I know Ian likes him at the field. I think he is going to play in the field, but if something happened to Manny Muhammad, I think he can fit in seamlessly to the field because I think he processes so quickly. That's the reason Muhammad's in the field or at the boundary to begin with.
What if you were to have one element of your defense? Let's take the defensive tackle position. That seems to be the main topic of conversation that isn't as strong. Maybe let's say that's your weakest point, and I'm not suggesting that. What one other area do you want to be really strong to compensate for that?
Cornerback.
Okay. And can you expand on that a little bit, Ian?
If you have a lockdown corner, or I mean, two is even better, but if you have just one where you don't have to devote a safety to helping him out, then you can just allocate those resources to cover up holes elsewhere. A lockdown cornerback is one of the most like force multiplier things you can have in college football. And then the only other competitive spot I would say would be a dominant defensive tackle.
Right.
Yeah,
I was
Ian's
just
right.
I was going to say pass rush. Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, I think Ian's right from a big picture whiteboard perspective. Because if you have so this was kind of my critique or suggestion or whatever going into the Washington playoff game, which was, hey, we've got these two elite guys inside. Washington doesn't want to run necessarily, and they've got an injured running back who isn't that explosive anyway. Let's try to stop their run game with 5 guys. And let's just flood the field with defensive backs and have coverage, layered coverage everywhere with man under. And, because that gives you the flexibility. Conversely, if you don't have the defensive tackles, play the corners, count on them, rely on them, and you can bring an extra man down, and then you can stop the run with numbers. So, Eric, you're going to say pass rush?
Yeah, I was going to say pass rush just because I think that makes life easy for the whole secondary. It gets offenses behind the sticks a lot. They're going to get off the field. It's hard, once you have a negative play, it's a lot harder to convert a first down. And I think they have the guys to pull it off. I think the pass rush is going to be by far the best, at least off the edge that they've had, and maybe even inside, just because they might have to slant and stunt their way to it. And they've got Alfred Collins, who's poised for a breakout, I believe. But I think pass rush coming off the edge, they've got the horses to do it this year.
And this will lead into our second topic of discussion, the idea about the transfer portal and whether we're not done or not. But let's say we're talking about not filling any more positions in the defensive tackle area. And we've already highlighted our edge being a strength. We're talked about the intelligence and the maturity of our secondary. We'll start with you here, Paul. Do you see anything, given that personnel, changing schematically, or are we going to stick with the PK of old?
That's a great question. I mean, we were experimenting with some different stuff. PK of old, what vintage, right? He's done different stuff in his career. He did seem pretty married to two high for big portions of last year. I think we're trying to look at single high, meaning one safety up high versus two. So I think we're going to look at that. And then, the Jatavian Cole or Gavin Holmes or maybe even Jahdae Barron, whoever they want to play out at the field corner. Kwiatkowski does have a history of that guy having a little bit, if they trust him and the guy's smart, he has the ability to freelance a little bit. He has the ability to kind of play off coverage or show off coverage and then just break hard on a route underneath him and try to take it the other way. And he's demonstrated the willingness to do that. So as you get a little more experience and you communicate better and you get a smarter secondary, you can start to do unpredictable things right before the ball snap. And it's the offense that's going to bust because of you doing that rather than you busting because you tried to do something different and throw a different look. So I think that's what could be different. And as Eric said, I just expect the pass rush to be better, not just because we have edges that can pass rush, but we have some interior guys who can pass rush. We've got blitz linebackers who can bring it. Benda can come. We've seen that. And certainly Anthony Hill is a guy you're not averse to having sprinting up a gap and trying to cause some problems. So I think there's a potential to be interesting. And I think it is very important this offseason for Nansen to push some of PK's boundaries on what he's willing to entertain in September, October, and November.
And we've seen, just PK having obviously like Patterson, all these people in there. He's amenable to that level of input and malleability in the way that he approaches things. Ian, are you seeing anything? Or I know that we've talked a lot in these last few months about exactly what Paul was alluding to, this single high coverage and changing the way that we approach that. But all the way through from the guys in the trenches back there, do you see any other major schematic changes that might affect this specific personnel?
The single high one is really predominant, probably. If you look at how Nansen liked to stop the run at Arizona, it was basically get as many guys on the field as you needed to play man coverage, and then outnumber the run by stuffing extra bodies in the box. Even smaller guys, like he played his dollar package where he had 3 big defensive linemen, and then almost everyone behind them was a defensive back, except for a single linebacker who was like 225 pounds. So that approach of we're going to stop the run by just killing it before it gets started by stuffing bodies around there makes a lot of sense for Texas this year. And that would be why you would experiment with single high, so you could have that dynamic to your team. Other than that, I mean, there's a number of other things they could or might mix in, but that's probably going to be the one that we're going to talk about the most, because run defense without those 2 big defensive tackles might be such a big thing.
Eric, any thoughts on this before we transition over to where we are with the transfer portal?
No, I'll just say, what we heard in the spring is not going to be indicative of what we hear in August. There's a build up to it. We've got so many new bodies in camp. A lot of new guys getting more reps than they ever had before. They're just getting them familiar with the basics of their scheme. So we're going to hear a lot more about Nansen's input in August. Everybody's really excited about his coaching ability. Like, he's extremely detail oriented. We've heard numerous times that you can tell he's a coordinator, not a position coach. Not necessarily at Texas, but that's his upside. Or that's his ability. You can tell that he's done it before. So we're going to hear a lot more of what they're going to be cooking up stuff all summer long to input and try and experiment with in August, and they'll come up with some interesting things. I feel, I think Choate was a fantastic coach, but I think that his hitting him tied at the hip with PK was probably not the greatest thing for going into this next season. So Nansen coming in with new ideas like Paul and Ian are talking about. We'll start hearing about a lot more about that in August, and practice reports are going to get a lot more interesting in August than they were in the spring.
And transitioning over, where are we now with the transfer portal? I mean, it seems as if the needs that we were really pushing for, or at least highlighting, were certainly at the defensive tackle position, bringing in arguably the top, if not one of the top cornerbacks in the portal, not to mention what we did prior to this window. Where is Texas in this? Are we done? Are we? I know you posted a little bit about this on the board at InsideTexas.com today, but where we are today, where do you see it moving forward?
Well, I'll say that they feel they got the best corner in the transfer portal. They looked at a number of other guys, but he's the one they wanted. I think a lot of that had to do with scheme fit in the direction they're headed, but to them, he was the best guy. Yeah, they're still looking. I'm not optimistic that they'll find somebody worth truly pursuing, but they're looking as hard as they were 2 weeks ago. They're going back over guys, seeing if they missed something about them. Obviously, nobody new is going to go in now. So they're kind of left with the guys they've already evaluated, but they're turning over every stone, making sure everybody's signed and they're happy with their situation at the school that they committed to. And, if you try hard enough, usually something pops up, but we'll see if it's something worth truly pursuing, just because, the roster's in really good shape. But yeah, if a defensive tackle somehow emerged out of nowhere that they maybe missed the first time or isn't signed to school, fully signed, maybe something will pop up.
As we move forward in this, one of the questions we had from the board, our friend Taylor T is asking this season moving forward, and this is more of the fun type of the questions. And we'll go around the board and ask this. We'll start with you, Ian. What 3 games do you have circled, and for what reason? I mean, obviously there are great matchup games, but is there any personal that you're really excited to see?
Well, if I were the coach and I were just trying to decide which 3 games need the most attention, I would go Michigan. It's almost by default. It's the only real game in the non-conference. So if you're not giving that extra attention, it doesn't really make sense not to, right? Oklahoma, Steve Sark really does not need to be getting into a 1-3 hole against Oklahoma as the head coach of Texas. Last year was pretty bad, frankly, to lose that game. And yeah, and the first game too. I mean, they arguably should have won the first time as well. And then this one will be controversial. I say A&M over Georgia as the third game to put the big emphasis on for a couple reasons. One is that it's the renewal of a rivalry, and you really want to establish the big brother thing as quickly as possible for recruiting, for everything. It would be very satisfying to the fans. Secondly, you can afford a loss to Georgia in the playoff picture much more than you can afford a loss to Texas A&M. If Georgia is everything that we expect them to be this season, and Texas makes it to the playoffs, they will likely as not get another crack at Georgia. You only get this one shot at the renewal of the rivalry with A&M. So, yeah, I would say win those other 3 games. If you lose, and plus Georgia's right after Oklahoma. I mean, that's tough to get back up to that game. So, seems like maybe Paul agrees. I'm curious.
Yeah, let's hear your thoughts, Paul.
Yeah, I thought I was going to be controversial because there's only 4 right answers, right? It's Michigan, OU, Georgia, A&M. Well, I mean, is it Kentucky and Colorado State? Probably not.
I disagree, but we'll get to that.
Oh, interesting. Good. I'm glad. So I actually thought this through. So Texas could actually lose to Georgia and still win the SEC title. Texas could lose to Georgia and not, see them again or whatever, and still be the 5 seed, which, as we've talked about in prior shows and we've written about, that's actually not a disadvantageous position given how the playoff structure is built. You're going to be hosting a G5 team more than likely, right? So I think actually Michigan, for the reason Ian said, I think OU for the reasons Ian said, I think A&M. I just think if you drop OU or A&M, you actually are less likely to get playoff cred. And Georgia, I mean, is the best team on the schedule, so it seems odd, or at least preseason they're the best team on the schedule. It seems odd not to circle them. But if I were circling 3 games, it would be Michigan, Georgia, and A&M. I guess you could say maybe you can take a Michigan loss early and then rally through the SEC schedule. But I just think that it's a little bit of a black mark. And it would actually make me less confident in Texas because I think although the Michigan defense profiles to be excellent, the Michigan offense does not. And that would be concerning if we can't handle them early. So I'm curious, what do you think, Eric?
You guys make compelling points. If Michigan was like Alabama last year, where we expected them to be a title contender, I would probably go with them as a top 3 game. We saw the bounce that Texas got. Texas probably doesn't make the playoffs if they lose that game and win and maybe not lose to Oklahoma. Then it gets really tight, right? I mean, they got in the playoffs because Alabama was in the playoffs. At least that's what made it a no-brainer. That same doesn't work with Michigan. I'm going to go with Georgia, and this is where it shows that I'm a guy that follows recruiting closely, is because I think if they win that game, at the same time they're trying to get these big bodies out of the Southeast, I think that'll go a long way. You know, the Alabama win helped. Now you beat Georgia. You slay those 2 dragons in back-to-back seasons. I'm going to go with them. And then just to make my Twitter life a lot easier, you got to go Oklahoma and A&M. But also those are pretty important for Texas too. But selfishly, it's got to be Texas and OU. And then I go with Georgia because I don't think Michigan's going to be good. It's going to be tough to win there. I think this team is going to have a whole lot of confidence based on how they went into Tuscaloosa last season. I'm worried about the game because their defense is so good. But I feel good about Texas going up to Ann Arbor. I'll go with Georgia. I think that you're going to get a recruiting bounce right when recruiting starts to heat up. October, November, December could go a long way.
LC, let me just say, I think Eric is right. A Georgia win is more meaningful than a Michigan win.
Yep.
So it just kind of depends on how you come at it. But if you're a coaching staff and you're trying to circle 3 games to give extra attention to, you're going to end up circling Michigan because it's the non-conference game, whereas Georgia is packed right in there in the tougher slate.
Well, and again,
it's easy to motivate the guys through the summer if you've got the defending national champs as your second game of the season. There's no doubt.
They've got Michigan written on a chalkboard somewhere. Like that's
100%.
That's a rallying point. That's something they're getting people fired up for.
And obviously, the 3 is it's a great number for us to use. It's obviously an arbitrary number. I mean, I think we all would agree on 4 teams. I think the only outlier I have there is obviously Vanderbilt. I mean, we have a losing record against Vanderbilt.
Sure.
We can't fix that this year. I mean, that's the problem, is we can't just win this game and then have a winning record against Vanderbilt. So this is going to be a process. It's going to take us some time. Obviously, we're in their building, if you want to call it a building. I'm pretty sure it's just a field next to the labs, but it's an opportunity for us to go in there and reclaim some dominance, because frankly, if you look at the lifetime record, Vanderbilt has pretty much worked us like a part-time job. So I think taking the 3 that you guys have established, and then again, starting to, let's get a little pride back in this team. I don't know that I would circle it, but I'm obviously not the coach. With anything else going through here, guys. So this is it. This is our 9 a.m. We're giving this a try to see how it goes. We weren't getting hit as much on the super chats or any chats, if we're being honest, moving forward. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to do this in the future. We really thank you for your time. And I promise you, I'm going to keep my hands up here, boys. Does anybody have any closing thoughts?
Do you want to do a going, gone on chat questions in case anyone's got an itchy question finger?
Sure.
Brett Nelson must be working right now, huh?
I don't like it. Well, Brett Nelson has to have that job so he can throw us some super chats. I mean, it's one of those
on Brett's availability.
That's a fair point. We just set up a calendar and just see when Brett can keep this thing funded. That would be really, really helpful.
Hey, boys, people should sign up for Inside Texas. We're on the move right now. If you follow recruiting, I've got 2 stops today. One in Conroe to see Dorian Brew, and then I'm heading off to Lufkin to see Zion Williams. So 2 of the biggest priorities in the entire class for Texas. Justin will be hitting the road hard this week. Charlie will be hitting the road hard this week. So if you follow recruiting, make sure to sign up. Use our promo code UT1 for 2 months for $1.
Paul, we do have one question, and it's an over-under question, and because you're a degenerate gamble, would you take the over-under on 10.5 wins this season?
So regular season means no conference championship game potential. Is that
correct?
Right?
Yeah,
that's typically how Vegas sets that. 10.5 is a problem, gentlemen and ladies, because that's the proper line. That is the proper setting of the line. And really what you need to look at is what's the minus and the plus on either side of that. That's what would influence your bet. So if it's plus 122 plus, over, that's where you want to lean. If that over number is minus 122 or 125 or even 118, no bueno from a gambling perspective. That's not good. Texas could play really well and lose to a really good team, which we've just talked about in the 4-team scenario, right? And then you could stub your toe once. That happens. Go 10-2. You're still a playoff team. You could still win the national title and not cover this bet. So that's the fear and the danger of it. The upside of this is if you get plus money on the over part, and I mean decent plus money, then yeah, Texas can get on a roll and go undefeated or even just lose 1 game. So hey, I do have a bonus thing to throw in that maybe we should talk about.
Please.
So I think part of what happens is we know that we have a need at a position, and then there's a guy that you're familiar with the name, and then he goes in the portal, and everyone gets all fired up. And so I think that happened with Dominic Williams, right? I think there's a common man perspective that Dominic Williams is like a high-level potential All-American, and we've not seen that from his play. His best play was his freshman year, as Ian pointed out, with some good players next to him. So either he slumped off a little bit, or maybe he needs to see one-on-one blocking to be, really effective. But he didn't have a great sophomore season. He didn't have a bad sophomore season. He just was a guy at a need and one of many potential guys. And then I think people feel like they got the carpet pulled out from him, on him. And then we get this no-name guy from G5 San Jose State. Well, this isn't good. This isn't satisfying. I mean, the truth is, I don't think Texas lost anything in that exchange other than corner was a useful luxury, whereas DT, we feel like there's more need. But there's still 4 months. We can improve the defensive tackle room internally. Like, guys can get better at football. Jere Bledsoe could figure some stuff out in the next 4 months. And I don't just mean the offseason, getting stronger and more explosive, but he's got a month of August practice to get better and learn his trade. He could bust out. We could get more consistent play from Alfred Collins. Vernon Broughton's wife could allow him to practice and not overschedule him to go do like pottery barn and color me mine art projects. So there's all sorts of potential.
Oh, do we know what Vernon's new last name is?
I know he goes by Mrs. Vernon Broughton.
Is there a hyphen in there now?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm just kidding, Vernon. I'm just kidding, Vernon.
It's Broughton Horowitz Cheng. Interestingly enough.
Ian, who wins the Big 12 this year?
I'm going to go with Utah if Cam Rising is back and he's right. They've had a couple of losses in the transfer portal. I mean, this is the first year that I don't have much to say about the Big 12 because I don't need to anymore. I've been an expert on it for like 14 unrewarding years. And it's just not very relevant anymore. I think it's a really fun league. I'll probably still end up watching a lot of games because there's such amazing parity now. But I don't have great analysis other than that Utah seems like the strongest program, and they have good answers for the problem that plagues most Big 12 teams, which is how to get big athletic bodies in the trenches that can win. And Utah has always got all these big.
Well, let's talk.
Well, I'll say this about the Big 12 really quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
It's going to be the only conference that I know of where eight teams could legitimately win it. So if you're a bettor, I would shy away from the favorites, and I would try to find an underdog that looks interesting to you, that maybe benefited in the portal. But the truth is, most Big 12 teams didn't win in the portal. If you read guess what league won in the portal overwhelmingly? It's not a trick question.
Yeah,
SEC. So, the Big 12, as Ian, I lament the fact that I've built all this expertise in this league that is no longer useful to me in any way. But yeah, there's legitimately 8 teams that could win the league. And I think find 3 that you think are getting really good odds and then sprinkle some money on it rather than trying to throw it all in on a favorite.
We've been talking a lot about the defensive big men. Let's talk about the offensive big men for a second and how they would pair up with the legendary, as it were, SEC defensive lines. What are our thoughts there? I mean, this is probably, at least in modern history, depending on what time frame you want to assign that to, the most experienced offensive line we've had in a long time. What are your thoughts here, Eric? How do we match up with the defensive lines in the SEC?
They match up well. We've got some data on that the Alabama game last year where they put that game away on the ground. Everybody is looking for defensive tackles. Even Georgia wasn't necessarily after guys, but they weren't not after guys either. They were in the market too if the right guy appeared. So they like their guys. I don't think they have as dominant players as they once did. LSU is in dire straits at defensive tackles. They'll take anybody. They need Dominic Williams more than Texas. They just lost Simeon Barrow to Miami. They're hurting bad. Everybody talks about Texas needing defensive tackles. They're in a much better position than LSU. So I feel good about Texas's offensive line going against the other SEC DL. Now there's not going to be any weeks off because those guys get drafted up and down. Mississippi State will have a guy or two. Ole Miss, we know, is just Ole Miss is going to have some guys that just got Walter Nolan if they play them at some point. So I mean, there's going to be the level is a lot better than the Big 12, but I think the Texas OL with its maturity and experience matches up very well.
Ian, what are your thoughts?
The best defensive line Texas will face is like 15 minutes from my house over in Ann Arbor. A lot like Eric was just noting, a lot of the big SEC schools are actually a little bit weak there. Georgia, even they'll be good, but they were down last year on defensive line, which is why they lost the SEC championship game. And I don't think they're fully rebuilt. So it'll be a thing. It's more of a thing this next season on like a week-to-week basis. You just face a lot more quality single players than you would in the Big 12. But there's not a lot of dominant-looking lines in the SEC for next year. The second best defensive line Texas faces next year might be A&M.
So I can tell you the third, and it'll surprise people. Kentucky.
Yeah.
They actually have some really good guys, and they've got a guy in the interior who will be a first-round pick probably. So that's the thing about the SEC is you can have years where a Kentucky or a Mississippi State has 2 or 3 NFL guys in their front. Fortunately, the rest of the team usually doesn't check out, but that's kind of the weird thing. We didn't really get that in the Big 12 where you'd play, a middling Big 12 team and they've got 3 NFL guys in their front. That doesn't really happen. But I love the matchup of the Texas O-line against most of the D-lines we'll face. I mean, we'll be in much better shape than most other SEC offensive lines. And, Michigan's offensive line on the other side, they'll be scrambling to put some stuff together as well. So,
Eric, you get these questions a lot. Who's our starting secondary? First game of the season, first series rolling out there. What do you see? And obviously, we're going to hold you to this. This is going to dictate whether you actually know what you're talking about or not.
Oh Lord, I go Muhammad Cole at corners. Free safety, I'm going to go with Eric Williams. Boundary safety, I'll go with Michael Taft. Nickel, I'll go with Jahdae Barron. And I think Makuba's going to be.
Do you have anything to contribute here?
Play a lot. Yeah, Makuba's going to play a lot, but I think they'll roll out Williams and Taft at safety. I think.
I was going to say exactly what Eric just said. At least to start the year.
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody
we're talking first series.
Everybody wants to hear Taft is going to get benched. I saw it in my mentions. I'm like, I don't get it, man.
All right, let's move over to Dennis Donaldson has decided to give us a super chat, and we really appreciate that. Anytime you throw a super chat in here, we're going to speak to it. So if Bryant is 3rd, Alex would be 4, Mitchell 5. What do we need to figure out about adding more defensive tackles at this depth? I mean, where do we see us going with this?
Yeah, he's looking at depth at 3 tech and 1 tech. It sounds like D tackle and those tackles. Your D tackles are probably going to be Alfred Collins. We know that without a doubt. Probably Vernon Broughton behind him, and then Jere Bledsoe. So that's your 1 through 3. Nose tackle, I think Bill Norton's going to start behind him. I think it's probably going to be. I struggle with Aaron Bryant and Tia Savea because Savea is not all that damn big. I think it's going to be Bryant and then Savea, but I'm not sure. And then, I think Alex January is going to be pushing Sadir Mitchell all August. So that would be your 4th. I think Alex January is going to play maybe Trill Carter snaps at least later in the season.
Sadir Mitchell is the last guy I'd want to push.
Yeah. I'm not betting on Sadir for this season. He's got to come with it. I think they're going to be okay. I think worst case scenario, I think that's Norton and Alfred Collins can be a top 3 or 4 D tackle tandem in the league, I think. Based on what we were just talking about. It's not a tackle year in the SEC.
Well, this is alluding a little bit to what we were just talking about with defensive tackle depth, and I'll give this one to you, Paul. Will facing deeper teams compare to playing teams with gimmick schemes like what was in the Big 12? So obviously I think the translation here is Big 12 was maybe a little bit able to skew away from their lack of depth with some more gimmick type offenses. But obviously when we're getting into the SEC, things are a little bit more straight and narrow. What are your thoughts on depth and moving forward? In my opinion, I think Texas is set up pretty nicely for this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
So the SEC is actually schematically more sophisticated than the Big 12 now, which is surprising to people, but it's coaching. Coaching determines that. So the Big 10 is about to have an X's and O's renaissance with Kalen DeBoer and Jonathan Smith and guys like that joining the fold. So, I think it's
whoa. You mean Oregon and Lincoln Riley going to the Big 10.
Yeah, that's part of it too.
Yeah,
but Jonathan Smith is the new head coach at Michigan State.
Yeah, you said Kalen DeBoer, who's down in the SEC now.
Oh God, what am I doing? I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's 9 a.m. It's fine. Don't worry about it. You're fine.
Oh God, yeah. Accuracy is not important in this.
Buy Texas football and catch on.
Yeah. So my point is, the SEC got Kalen DeBoer. That's going to level you up. Obviously, you've got Steve Sarkisian. Say what you want about OU, but they're not going to run conventional stuff anywhere on offense or defense. You're going to have to understand that you're going to face some scheming and some trickeration when you play OU, especially Texas, right? Talking about a circled game. So yeah, I mean it's odd to think, but the SEC is far more sophisticated as an X's and O league than the Big 12 is now. The Big 12's actually went more conventional which is kind of funny. Mike Gundy's still in the league, whatever. But it ain't the Big 12 of Art Briles and those guys running stuff. So I think it'll be very interesting. But yeah, I mean, look, the SEC's the best league, and there's really as I said, 2 leagues that are going to matter. And so Texas has to be ready on all fronts. You've got to have a deep team, you got to have the X's and O's, and then you got to have the frontline starter talent, not just depth, right? You got to have some elite guys who can actually go win the game for you.
Just to emphasize that, Tennessee, Josh Heupel runs Art Briles' scheme.
Yep.
Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin, they run something similar to the Briles scheme. Oklahoma, Jeff Lebby, that's Art Briles' son-in-law. Alabama now with Kalen DeBoer.
Jeff Lebby's at Mississippi State now.
Oh, you're right. But they still run that scheme. They got Joe John Finley and Seth.
My experts are on fire right now.
We have no credibility.
But that's like 4 or 5 teams that are running schemes that originated to some extent in the Big 12. So, like Paul said, it's different.
If you are looking for this level of expert analysis and any deeper, please check out InsideTexas.com. We're running a special right now. If you can, it's promo code IT1 will get you 2 months for $1. We really appreciate your time here. I'm just curious now that Belichick and Saban are coaching Wichita State, what are your thoughts on that, Eric, moving forward? I mean, do you see them having the dominant defense that they should, or are they going to skew more towards a single wing offense?
I think they're going to shock a lot of people.